Hello students, in this video we will study the histology of stomach. This is the 54th session of histology topic in the endocrinology paper. The digestive system is made up of alimentary canal and digestive glands. So alimentary canal is actually a muscular tube which extends between mouth and anus. So this muscular tube is variously modified into different structures in higher animals, like in humans. So this alimentary canal is divided into, it is modified into pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, etc. So this continuous tube is modified variously because it has to perform different type of functions. Say for example, in pharynx, it is only a part where the food is going to be transported. It is passed from mouth to the esophagus, whereas esophagus is also a part where it is associated with passage of food, and the stomach is the part where the food is going to be stored, and the digestion actually begins in the stomach, and then the food will move on to the small intestine where it is going to be completely digested and absorbed. And after the process of digestion and absorption, the food is going to enter into large intestine where the undigested food is going to be converted into fecal matter, and whatever the minerals and water which is present in the undigested food, it is going to be reabsorbed by the large intestine. So here what we are going to study is this portion, and anatomically you can see the stomach is a sac-like structure because its main function is to store the food. And here actually we are supposed to study the histology of stomach. Now the stomach uh, is a muscular, it is a highly muscular organ, and it is a hollow organ because there must be a lot of space for storing the food. And the stomach has dilated structure and functions as a vital digestive organ. So here in this diagram, let us first understand the anatomical parts, and then we can move on to the histological details. So this is the part of the esophagus that connects to the stomach. Now this is the stomach. So this sac-like structure which is having a curvature. Now this is the stomach, and esophagus connects to the stomach at this point. And this first part is called fundus, and then we have the body part and this antrum and this pylorus part. Histologically, we see slight difference in these different areas, but overall the stomach shows same type of histological structure. Now let us move on to the histological details of the stomach. The wall of the stomach shows four basic layers. Now remember, whole of the alimentary canal starting from esophagus up to the large intestine shows these four layers. Only the thickness and structure varies from part to part. So the four layers which are found in stomach, and of course in alimentary canal in general, they are the serosa layer, which is the outermost layer. Then below that we find muscularis layer, and then submucosa and mucosa. So like this, the transverse section of the stomach, if you take the transverse section and observe it under microscope, you can see four layers. So they are serosa layer, muscularis layer, submucosa layer, and mucosa layer. So here in this diagrammatic representation, you can see this is the serosa layer. Below that you find the muscularis, and then this is submucosa, and the innermost layer, which is most functional, is mucous layer. Now, this is the transverse section of stomach. So you can see the layers, and serosa, of course, is a very thin layer which we cannot differentiate here. So the outermost layer is serosa, and then you find the muscularis. Now remember, if you compare the muscularis layer of esophagus and the intestine, like small intestine and large intestine, so the mucus layer of stomach is very thick. So comparatively, in the alimentary canal part, stomach is more muscular in nature, and that's why it shows some contractions and relaxation. So the muscularis layer is very thick, and then you find the submucosa layer and muscularis internal layer and mucosa layer. Now the infoldings on the inner side of the stomach, we find the foldings. So here you can see the wall of the stomach shows foldings, and these foldings are typically called rugae, right? So in case of small intestine, what we find are finger-like projections which are called villi, but here we don't find villi. Now this is because stomach is not having absorption function, so there is very little digestion and literally no absorption in the stomach. Now in this diagram, let us try to understand the layers of stomach. So this is the serosa, the outermost layer, and this serosa is made up of connective tissue mainly, and then below that you find muscularis externa. Now commonly we call it as muscularis, but this thick layer is called muscularis externa because there is one more muscularis layer which is found in the mucus layer, so that you can consider it as muscularis mucosa or muscularis interna. Anyway, so the first layer, the outermost layer, is serosa, and below that you find this muscularis layer, and this muscularis layer is actually made up of muscles arranged in different directions. So here, outer layer, you can see the longitudinal muscles, and then you find the circular muscles or the muscle fibers which are arranged in longitudinal manner here, and below that you find a layer where you find the circular layer and also the muscle fibers arranged in oblique manner. So because of these three kind of arrangements, the muscularis is very strong and it's very thick, right? So as I already mentioned, compared to other parts of the alimentary canal, stomach has a very thick muscularis layer, and then below that you find the mucosa layer, submucosa, which is very uh, thin, and it is also made up of connective tissue, blood vessels, lymph vessels, etc. And then comes the innermost layer, that is mucosa. Now in this picture you can see the mucosa layer consisting of connective tissue with blood vessels, lymph vessels, nerve endings, etc. But most importantly, we find the cells or the structures, pit-like structures. You can see we commonly call them as gastric pits, right? So these gastric pits are lined with epithelial cells, and actually these gastric pits form the gastric glands, and we know that gastric glands are involved in secretion of gastric juice. So gastric juice consists of enzymes, hydrochloric acid, mucus, water, etc. So basically the gastric pit, which is lined with epithelium cells, so these epithelial cells are mainly secretory in function. And what are those different kinds of cells found in this gastric pit, we will study at the end. So here one gastric pit is enlarged, So different kinds of cells. So structurally you find different types of cells, and they are different functionally also. So this is a very simple picture showing all the four layers of stomach. I mean the stomach wall, outermost serosa, then muscularis layer, submucosa layer, and the innermost mucosa layer. Now, in brief, let us understand the serous layer or serosa layer. Gastric serosa is the outermost layer of the stomach wall. It consists of a layer of simple squamous epithelium known as mesothelium and a thin layer of underlying connective tissue. As I already mentioned you, this is the outermost layer and it's very thin. It consists of squamous epithelium tissue and a very thin layer of connective tissue. Now, this mesothelium or the squamous epithelial layer, which can be considered as mesothelium, it mainly produces serous fluid which lubricates the outer wall of the stomach. Right? Now, this outer wall of the stomach is maintained in a moist way by the secretion of these serous fluid, right? And the stomach actually exists in the abdominal cavity, and since it comes in contact with other organs of the abdominal cavity, so this lubricate I mean this fluid which lubricates the surface helps to maintain the organ without any friction, or you can say there is a easy and smooth movement of the stomach is possible because of this moisture or lubricant layer of the serous, I mean the outer layer I'm talking about. Then the next layer is muscularis. We already discussed about this. Of the all the layers of stomach, this one has the most mass and surrounds the submucosa. And as we already discussed, there are three layers of muscular tissue. So longitudinal muscles, connect and circular muscles, and oblique muscles. And this layer is mainly protective in function, and it protects the submucosa and mucosa of the stomach wall. And coming to the submucosa, this surrounds the mucosa and it is made up of blood vessels, nerves, and connective tissue. There is a common composition of almost all connective tissues, and the connecting tissue has nervous tissue, blood vessels, nerves, right? Now what happens is it actually supports the mucosa, and the materials are going to pass through this submucosa. So it controls secretions and smooth muscles contractions that move food through the stomach. Submucosa has a very simple role compared to the other layers. Now the innermost layer is the mucosa layer, and its main job is of the mucosa is to secrete mucus that protects the stomach from its own acids. Now I just want to uh, remind you, or you just recall the structure we studied few minutes ago. The innermost layer, which consists of, which is made up of mucosa, it has got gastric pits, which is made up of different kinds of cells. And one type of cell is going to produce hydrochloric acid. You know that very strong hydrochloric acid is secreted by the stomach. Now, the lucky thing or the good thing is the hydrochloric acid which is secreted by our own stomach is not going to digest our own stomach wall. Now that is because of the mucus which is secreted by some other kinds of cells. So in this way, uh, the mucus wall is protective against its own secretions. Now that's what we have to remember. And as we already studied, mucus layer consists of gastric glands, which is mainly going to produce gastric juice containing enzymes like pepsinogen, pepsin and renin, hydrochloric acid, mucus, water, etc. And This is the diagram of the slide of the transverse section of stomach. So you can clearly see this is the lumen of the stomach and the innermost layer, that is mucosa, showing the gastric pits, right? So you can see the pits extending very deep inside, and then you find this submucosa layer, and below this submucosa actually exists the muscularis layer, right? And lastly you find a very thin layer of serosa. Now that was about the histological detail of stomach. Okay, just to recall, the stomach wall is made up of serosa, muscularis, submucosa and mucosa layers. Now the gastric pit, which actually consists of gastric glands, and I already mentioned the gastric glands are made up of different types of epithelial cells which secrete different kinds of materials or secretions. Now what are those? So let us uh, study some of the important type of cells of this gastric glands. So mucus cells, as the name suggests, they are involved in secretion of mucus, and this mucus is going to protect the inner wall of the stomach against the enzymes, the hydrochloric acid, and other harmful substances or strong chemicals which may enter into the stomach in the form of food. Then we have parietal cells, and these parietal cells they produce intrinsic factor that binds to B12, vitamin B12, and absorbs this vitamin. So this is uh, involved in absorption of vitamin. And the most important function, actually the most important function of parietal cells is it produces hydrochloric acid, very strong hydrochloric acid. The hydrochloric acid plays a very important role in neutralizing the pathogens. You know, the food we consume or the water we drink, it may contain or it will definitely contain many kinds of harmful microorganisms like protozoans, bacteria, fungal, etc., etc. And all those pathogens are going to be killed or destroyed by this hydrochloric acid. And hydrochloric acid also has another function. So the fibrous food we consume, it's going to loosen it. So hydrochloric acid will act on the fibrous food we eat, and it makes the digestion of that fibrous food easy in the intestinal part. Then we have chief cells. So these cells are responsible for the production of gastric lipase and pepsinogen. So pepsinogen will be converted into pepsin enzyme, and the lipase enzyme, the gastric lipase, is the enzyme which begins the lipid digestion in the stomach. And the pepsin is actually a protein digesting enzyme. So theoretically, the pepsin, the protein and lipid digestion begins in the stomach. A very little amount of digestion happens in the stomach, and it is mainly due to the chief cells. And then we have G cells, and these cells are the ones which are involved in the secretion of gastrin. Now gastrin is a hormone that controls stimulation of the glands and muscles of the stomach. So this hormone is literally going to control how the stomach behaves, and the reaction of stomach to the entry of food, etc., etc. So the G cells, you can consider them as the endocrine cells of the stomach. Now that's about the histological detail of stomach. And so the cells, different types of cells which are found in the stomach wall. Okay, that's about it. Thank you.